Good evening. Yesterday was Pesach Sheni. I'm recording tonight, Tuesday night, the day after Pesach Sheni. And I just wanted to say an inyan. I mean, we all know that Pesach Sheni was everybody has a second chance. Every Yid, there's no such thing as giving up. And I promised this, I promised that, and I keep doing this, I keep doing that. So you give up, but we don't give up. But the vort that I want to say to you is that on the regular Pesach, the Mishnah says that if you have in your house, let's say chametz, so you can't bring the Korban Pesach. It was worthless. You couldn't have, and there were a whole list of things that we were required with Pesach Rishon, the regular Pesach, to do or to have. But when it came to Pesach Sheni, you could have all the chametz you wanted in the world in your house and still bring Pesach Sheni, the Korban Pesach. No problem. So why that distinct difference between, I mean, it was supposed to be, the Pesach Sheni was supposed to be a fulfillment of what we missed on Pesach, and one would assume that you have to replicate. You have to do exactly what the first was, but that wasn't the case, and the Mishnah says so. So the answer that's offered is that the power of Sfiras HaOmer is so strong, and because of the fact that in Chodesh Iyar we have a full month of counting of the Sfira, in Nisan with regular Pesach, we don't have. We only start the 16th day of the month. The first half, there's no Sfiras HaOmer. And in Sivan, again, 5 days Sfira, and then the 6th day is Shavuos. But in Iyar, it is a month that has such dynamic to it that we didn't need to get to the goal of what happens when you bring the Korban Pesach. You didn't need all of those conditions and all of those limitations. And that's the reason why on Pesach, there are many people who do not eat gebroks, which means they will not take matzah, let's say, and dip it into the soup. Why is that? Because we're choished, and it's the farthest chashash in a million pounds of matzah. Maybe once it could happen that there's a piece of matzah in the matzah you're eating, which is already baked and finished and ready to be eaten, that there's a drop of flour still there that was not baked, and when you put it into the hot soup, it's going to be baked and it may come to chometz. That's the farthest thing. But because it's Pesach, that there are plenty of people, my mother-in-law, let her be well, if somebody took a matzah and put it into the soup, she took the plate and the spoon and either threw it out or put it on the side. This was like the end of the world. But when we come to the 8th day of Pesach, people not only do it, they're mahader to do it. Now, the 8th day of Pesach may be a d'Rabbanan. It just says Shivas Yomim. But it's still Pesach. He's not chas v'sholom allowed to go eat chametz. So why that chumrah of not eating gebroks? A whole Pesach, we come to the 8th day and we eat it. And some go out of their way to make sure to dip in. So the answer is because 8 is above this world. Teva, nature, is 7 days of the week. What is the 8th day of the week? There is no 8th day. 8 is lamala minateva. So once you're lamala, you're out of this world, you could already put the matzah into it. You don't need any of the hidurim or siyogim, the limitations to be triple careful. You don't have to be careful. You're out of this world, out of this realm. And that is the bechina of Iyar. Why we could have a Korban Pesach and all of the inyanim that flow to Yidden when they brought the Korban Pesach, that when it came to Pesach Sheni, that was surrounded and drenched with the koyach of all of the sphera of the month each and every day, that we didn't need any of the trimmings. And you just brought the Korban Pesach and you had everything just fine without the hidurim. So that was the thought I wanted to express to you about Pesach Sheni, and to say to you that the Bnei Yissaschar brings in his Sefer Bnei Yissaschar that in Chodesh Iyar, the Arizal went in a rowboat in Tveria, in the Kinneret, with his star Talmud, Reb Chaim Vital. And at one point, the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital to take out a cup and to put it into the water and draw some water out and make a bracha. And Reb Chaim Vital, of course, did it. And after days and weeks, he came to realize that after he made that bracha on that cup of water that the Arizal told him to, there was never another passage or perek in Kabbalah that he didn't easily understand. He used to learn something and he had to dwell on it and sometimes ask what exactly it meant and exactly what was it. But when he drank this water, brings the Bnei Yissaschar, that he came back to the Arizal and said, what suddenly happened after you told me to drink that water? So the Arizal answered him and said that the Be'er of Miriam was right at that spot in the Kinneret where I told you to take the drink, and that is the Mayonos HaChochma, and forever, the rest of your life, it'll be easier for you to understand the Mayonos HaChochma of Kabbalah. Again, because, and he said it's the month of Ani Hashem Rofecha, and all types of healing. There are different levels of healing. There's a level of someone being simply sick, and he has to get better. But there's sometimes a blockage in the mind, but it's not a physical blockage, it's a spiritual blockage. And that Mayonos HaChochma removed from you forever that blockage in understanding the sod, the secrets of the Torah. Now, we know that there's a pasuk in this Sedra that says, V'nikdashti besoch b'nei Yisrael, that the pasuk begins, V'lo sechalalu es Shem kochi, don't make a chilul Hashem, V'nikdashti, but make a kiddush Hashem, that my name is sanctified. So the Chofetz Chaim once said that a person, many people think that what is called Kiddush Hashem, and they envision in their mind a firing squad or a fire that a person's jumping into, and that's Kiddush Hashem. So first he talked about the fact that it is a bigger Kiddush Hashem to live your whole life with Kiddush Hashem and not make a Chil Hashem than taking the minute to jump into a fire. After a minute, the person's dead. It was 1 minute, Kiddush Hashem. But he then said, it's incorrect, because you don't have to jump into a fire, or you don't have to be executed to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim Barabim. He said, when a Yid every day says Kadosh, 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 Kedusha, and Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkomo, and he picks up his head and he directs it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he has the mitzvahs aseh d'oraisa of v'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael with every Kedusha. So we are able to avail ourselves to the highest level of Kedusha and being Mekadesh Shem Shamayim Barabim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have the Nachas Ruach of that true Kiddush Hashem by availing ourselves to Kavana in Kedusha, Shachris, and Mincha each and every day. Now, there is a pasuk in this Sedra, there's a chunk of our Sedra that talks about every Yom Tov. Sukkot is discussed, Pesach is described, Shavuos, Yom Kippur, and in the middle of talking about each and every Yom Tov, there's a pasuk right in the middle, one pasuk. Uvekutzrechem es ketzir artzachem, lo secha lepa'asotcha bekutzrecha v'leket v'shikcha v'leket lo selaket le'oni v'lager tazovosam ani Hashem Elokechem. So Meforshim asked the question, what is this pasuk about leket and shikha and peah doing right into the middle of all the discussion about Yomim Tovim? And Rashi points out this question. Look in Rashi on that pasuk. But Meforshim say, and Rashi touches on it, that there are many mitzvahs that if the Torah didn't tell us to do it or not to do it, we wouldn't know. Shatnez. If we didn't know that you're not allowed to put wool and linen into a garment, the Torah tells us shatnez, we would never know about it. How would we know? And as I've said to you, by the way, the Arizal says that someone that wears shatnez even one time, for 40 days they lock out his tefillah from heaven. The Arizal says. So we have to be careful. Those of you wearing jackets or coats, make sure when you're in New York, or if you live in New York, make a trip to the Shatnez laboratory and take it, because the Isser is such a chomor, and it's one of those that we do not understand. No tam was given, just like basar b'chalav, paraduma, all of these are a chok, and shatnez is one of them. But I'm not here to talk about shatnez tonight. I'm just bringing an example that without the Torah telling us many of the mitzvahs aseh and the mitzvahs lo aseh, we wouldn't have any idea about it. So these Meforshim say that giving to aniyim is something that every person that has a drop of Rahmanis would do. And we would think that even without the Torah, every human being knows that's a human dimension. A person's without food, you bring him food, you give him the money to buy the food. But the truth is, lahavdil elef alfei avdolos, you take the Nazis, the German people were considered the most cultured, prim and proper nation that could have been. When people went to opera, so a man didn't go in without his formal attire and his white gloves. What? To go to the opera without the white gloves? It was out of order. They were prim and proper, and all of the culture and the theaters that they went to, that everything was done within the frame. Yet these were the most merciless, uxorious people with all of their culture because they had no Torah. Like they took 300 in one event, 300 shechtim, and they said, oh, you shechted animals to eat the animals? Well, we're going to show you how it feels. And they shechted all 300 shechtim with a chalaf. And some of them wearing white gloves because you have to be prim and proper. While they're shechting someone, they have to be prim and proper. So therefore the Mefarshim say that we don't rely on sentiment and feeling, because if somebody doesn't have the feeling, he would never do it. So we put into the middle of Yomim Tovim that you have one of the most basic things of Hergish to show you that the Torah shapes and molds your attitude and your action. And therefore, we're telling you right in the middle of Yom Tiv that you cannot forget about the ger, la ger, v'latoshav, al tazov, ani Hashem Elokeichem, that we have to give tzedakah to the poor and know that it's the Torah that tells you, and you have to make it part and parcel. To seep into your bones and your neshama, because the Torah told you. So you will never, ever, ever have an inch of room to deviate from the chesed that you do. Now, the beginning of our Sedra talks about Kohanim. Now, there is a famous question asked, because there's three things the Gemara says, that there's a pasuk that you're not allowed to, three things involving your children. One is that you are not allowed to feed them treif food. That when it says lo sochlum, the Gemara darshans, that not only for yourself, lo yeachel, lo sochlu, you can't eat, but you're not allowed to give. If a child asks you, let me taste how this shrimp or whatever tastes, you're not allowed. There's an Isser D'Oraisa of giving your children treif. The second is dam, blood. That blood is something that we know we cannot eat. We kasher the meat with salting it and soaking it and going to the nth degree to make sure that there is not a drop of blood in any of our food. And the third thing that the Gemara says is our parsha. Parshas Emor begins with the first whole section about Kohanim, that they cannot be metame themselves. So the question that is posed. Why do you have to include in Azara a warning to a person, to a Kohen? You make sure that your child understands that he can't become Tameh. We know from the tray food and from the dam that you have to set your children straight in what the halachas are. Why do you have to do for Kohanim that extra parsha to tell you that you have to make sure that they have a proper frame of mind and a proper derech in dealing with their kahuna? And the answer that they say is that we're not saying it to the Kohanim because we don't want the child to become Tomei. He learned the halachas, he knows he's not allowed to. But we're telling you about the children for kahuna is to enhance and uplift the dignity of kahuna, that a child has to know who's a kohen. You are special. You are in a level that's different than the Israel. You know, today, if you're sitting at a table at a chasna with a kohen sitting next to you, and you pour some water that you want, but you first pour for the kohen, out of courtesy, sitting right next to you, you pour for him, and then you're pouring for yourself. The fact that you poured him first, you were makayim a mitzvahs asay of vikidashto. When you're walking out of a door, this is not for a Levi, but it's for a kohen. You're walking out and the kohen's standing with you. The question is, who's walking out first? And you step back and you let the kohen go out first. That's called vikidashto. You were makayim a mitzvahs asay diaraisa of vikidashto. That the special status, not to tell you about the tumah, but to tell you that you have to teach a child that a yid has, and that goes for all of us, not just kohanim, that he's special. When Rav Pam was walking down the street and a car drove by with a bunch of shkotzim in the car, and they screamed at him, "Dirty Jew." So Rav Pam said that he wanted to dance to the end of the street, that they realized I'm a Jew. In other words, they realized that I'm a Yid. And that special status they recognized by calling me a dirty Jew. But I didn't want to look like an idiot, so I couldn't just dance in the street. So I didn't dance, but I was so thrilled that they realized I was a Yid. And that special status a child has to grow up with, and that a father has to tell him, you know, there's some people that don't fly in a plane even. We may fly because it's not our minig, but if they're a kohen, they don't fly in a plane, because if a plane goes over a cemetery, the tumah goes up to Shemayim. So the plane drives or flies through the impurity of that column of tumah coming out from that cemetery if it flies over. Most Kohanim do not do this because many poskim hold you don't have to go that far. But some of them will not even walk into a hospital because a hospital always has some dead body in its morgue. 99.9%. And you're not allowed to be tumasol, you're not allowed to be in one building. That's why Kohanim by a funeral stand outside. Don't go into a cemetery because they're not allowed to. The special status. So that carries through the backbone of Klal Yisrael, not Kohanim, and especially Kohanim. Now, it says in the opening pasuk, and this really Rashi talks about, the Medrash talks about, and the Gemara talks about, that it says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emor el ha-kohanim b'nei Aharon, say to the kohanim, V'amarta aleim, and say to them, L'nefesh lo yitama b'yamav. You can't make yourself tamei. So Rashi points out, what is this? If it says, Emor el ha-kohanim, say to the kohanim, what do you have to 2 words later say? V'amarta, and say to them. Emor v'amarta, twice to say? So Rashi brings down the Chazal, lahazir gedolim al hakatanim, that there's a special mitzvah for a father to teach the child about these inyanim. And it carries over to the inyanim that you have to teach him. Because, for instance, in our parsha, at the very beginning, it tells you that a kohen cannot be metama himself, except for 7 relatives: a father, a mother, a daughter, lo aleinu, lo alechem, a son, a brother. There's 7 exceptions. But a kohen gadol is not allowed to, even for those 7, he can't go to his father and his mother's levaya, the kohen gadol. The regular kohen could go. But there's one exception, that even the kohen gadol could be metame himself. That's called a meis mitzvah. And meis mitzvah means if there's someone who died, and there's no one to take care of his burial. He has no children, he has no relatives. So a lot of people think, yeah, that was in the times that you found a body in the middle of a field 300 years ago or 500 years ago. But the truth is, you have meis mitzvah today. Sometimes the hospital will call me that somebody died, there's no relatives, we don't know what to do with the body. That's meis mitzvah. And even a kohen gadol could go be oisik in it, because it's the dignity of the tselem elokim, of the body of this deceased person, that is there, and to stand up and underscore the importance of that dignity and that respect for a person who was a yid. And he ended up dying, and there was no one to take care of. We even allowed the kohen gadol to go there. So lahazir gedolim al haktanim, there are like 25 different pshatim, but this is one of them. That to bring out the parsha of who we have to respect and how to respect, you have to mold that attitude of even a youngster, a little kid, 4 years old, 6 years old, as they grow up, to be awesome of their kahuna and what that includes. Now, it says that the kohen gadol was only allowed to marry ki im besula me'amav yikach isha. He couldn't marry an almana, a widow. He could not marry a divorcee. Now, a regular kohen, not a kohen gadol, was allowed to marry an almana, but he could not marry a divorcee. And if someone, let's say today, and there are people who want to marry someone, and they're a kohen, and the person is a divorced woman, he loses the schusim of his kahuna. He is not called up, not he could, it doesn't have to be called up. In other words, if there's a tzibur, and you have a kohen in the tzibur, he has to get the first aliyah. That's part of vikidashto. But if he married a divorced woman, and he was machal, in other words, he made weekday his kahuna, and he married, you're not allowed to give him the first aliyah. You can get him the aliyah, like a regular Yisrael. And everything else that goes with it, duchening in shul, he does not go up to duchen. If he marries a goy, but even a divorced woman. But when it comes to almana, to a widow, he's allowed to marry her. But the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry her. Now, in the Gemara where it says this, Tosfos brings, and it says, the lashon of Tosfos is, Amar hahu chosed, that he quotes, Tosfos quotes a chosed. Some say the chosed was Rav Yehuda HaChosed. Others say it was someone else. But what is this quote? An astonishing quote. On the Gemara that says that the Kohen Gadol cannot marry an almana. Why? Why isn't he allowed to marry a widow? All the other Kohanim are allowed to marry the widow, but he's not. Because on Yom Kippur, this is in Tosfos, on Yom Kippur, when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Lifnai v'Lifnim, to the Holy of Holies, when he said the Shema Meforish, he could think of anything he wanted, and it would happen. And we were afraid, says Tosfos, that a Kohen Gadol will see a woman that he would love to marry, but she's married. So in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's going to have a kavanah that the husband should die so that she'll become an almana and he could marry her. So therefore the Torah asered him to marry any widow. So if you're going to have such a machshava that a woman's husband should die because you want to marry her, it's too bad. You're not going to be able to, even if he dies, because we're asering you to marry. A regular kohen doesn't go in and is not machaven to the Shem HaMeforish in the Kodesh Kedoshim, but the Kohen Gadol is. So the Chosed said in the Tosfos that the whole issue of a Kohen Gadol not marrying the almana is so that he should never be in a position of thinking of someone that he wants the husband to die, because he'll die, and if it's mutter, he'll marry her. But since the Torah asked him to marry an almana, he could never marry her, he won't have such a kavanah. Now, I ask you, dear listeners, we're talking about Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. We're talking about the Kohen Gadol, the holiest man on earth, going into the holiest place on the earth. And that's what we think he's going to have in mind on such a day when he has a mission to have Klal Yisrael have Mechila, Slicha, and Kapara, and save a whole Klal Yisrael from a year of tragedy and difficulty, and be mamshech only Shefa Rav, the goodness of bracha and everything that's good in this world. And we're going to think for a minute that his kavanah is going to be to kill the man so that he could marry the woman. Tosfos says it. So you see how human frailty, that we are so weak that a human being, I mean, he was Kohen Gadol, but he was a human being. And we see that many Kohanim Gedolim died in the Kodesh Kedoshim because they had 1 second of a machshava zara, they died. And I've said to you 10 times that they used to put a rope on the foot, around the foot of the Kohen Gadol, because just in case he had a machshava zara and died, they couldn't go in to take out the body, so they had to pull him out with the rope. And we're choished that a Kohen Gadol, this is what he's going to think? On Yom Kippur, in the Kodesh Kadosh, yes. Because a human being could be holy of holies and fall to the depths of the ugliest of the ugly, because he's still confined to a body and he still could fall anywhere, anytime, and any place. Now, there was a story in Tanakh that Shimi ben Gera was a myriad b'malchus to King David, to David HaMelech. And David HaMelech, if someone's a myriad b'malchus, that means he rebels against the king, there's a death penalty. But David HaMelech had a cheshbon that he didn't want to kill him. He wanted his son, Shlomo HaMelech, who became right after him. David HaMelech died at the age of 70, and he was king for 40 years. He became king when he was 30. And Shlomo HaMelech, his son, took over when his father David died, was nifter, and became king at age 12. And was melech for the same 40 years that his father was melech, same number of years. And he was nifter at age 52. 40 years, 12 to 52. And he told his son before he died, I want you to end up killing Shimi ben Gera. I'm leaving it in your hands. He's chayav misa. And I have my reasons. I don't want to effectuate the punishment myself. So when David HaMelech was nifter, Shlomo HaMelech told the Shimi ben Gera, I want to tell you that you are obligated to have the death penalty. But I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to kill you when you leave Yerushalayim. You are confined to like house arrest. You must stay in Yerushalayim the rest of your life. The day you leave Yerushalayim, you're dead. And the story goes that 2 of his slaves escaped and went out of Yerushalayim. And he ran after them to find them, and he found them and punished them. And then Shlomo HaMelech said to him, you left Yerushalayim, and he killed him. Now the Kohen Gadol was not allowed to leave, and the Rambam talks that there was a special office that he had in the Bais HaMikdash. That was the Lishkas Kohen Gadol, the office, his private office that nobody else went into, and he was there day and night. And even if he went home, the house had to be in Yerushalayim. He wasn't allowed to step out of Yerushalayim. So the question is, he knew he would have a death penalty if he stepped out of Yerushalayim. Shimi. Why did he do it? And the answer is that Kadmonim say that when a person is imbued and instilled and encompassed within the realm of Kedusha, it sets aside the level of Tumah. But if a person isn't to the Tumah also, means he keeps Kol HaTorah Kula, but he's busy with a little of this, a little of that, it displaces the Kedusha. When a person displaces the Kedusha, then his regular thinking a person would remember, oh, I can't step out of Yerushalayim. But because of what he did in his lifetime, it displaced the Kedusha and the trend of thought in the realm of Kedusha. And that is the reason why he ended up leaving Yerushalayim. But the Kohen Gadol, I mean, imagine if he was Kohen Gadol like Yochanan Kohen Gadol for 80 years. And he was sitting in his office 16 hours a day because he had to stay in the Bais Hamikdash, and he couldn't leave Yerushalayim. After most of us, after a year or 2 or 3, we got to get away for a few days. We can't sit in one room and be able to function. We're like bursting at our seams for a little different scenery, a different... But you find Rebbes, there were Rebbes that stayed their whole life in their shul and in their room. You take the Lubavitcher Rebbe. For 50 years, literally, as a matter of fact, it was, I think, no, it was 44 years. He never went on a vacation. And he sat 17 hours a day in his office for 44 years. How didn't he explode? How could he be so happy? How could he greet people with such flavor and such feeling? And there were many other tzaddikim the same thing. And most of them, like Rav Michal Yehuda Lefkowitz and Rav Steinman and many of the Litvish, they lived into 100, and they barely went in. If there was an ace lassos that they had to take a plane to America for money or for an asifa, this was rare. But they went for 50 years, 60 years with their Gemara in their room. The answer is because they were saturated and drenched with Kedusha. From the Koyach HaTorah, the Tahara that was put into them, they weren't even physical. They were physical in the sense that they had the body. But it was not physicality beyond the slightest point, and then they were completely ruchni. So once you're ruchni, you could sit in a room for 1,000 years. There's no problem. And that's the reason on Lag BaOmer that we rejoice. You know, most people, when they have yortzeit for someone, a father, a mother, they get emotional when the yortzeit comes. The memories of the father, the memories of the mother. They're not in a mood of dancing and then clapping. So why in Lag BaOmer we're celebrating? That's the yortzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Why would we celebrate on a day of a yortzeit? But the answer is that when someone is complete kadosh, the only thing that they possess that's still gashmias, physical, is their body. They're in a physical body. So when they pass on, their power, as the Zohar Kodesh says, Gedola b'misosam yoser mibachayehem, that they become holier. The last 1% that was physical, they divested because now they were nifter, and they become 100% holy. And that's why Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who in his lifetime was so holy and so ruchni that the Gemara says that he said that he was able to exempt the world from being guilty. In other words, if he stood up against the whole world and you had 1 million Yidden with 1 million Averas, he could be able to counteract those million people and wipe their slate clean. That he had the power to do so. And when he lived, it says that in the Gemara that there was never a keshes, a bow, because by Noach Hashem promised there will be no rainbow. In other words, there will be no flood again and destroy the world. Now, when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was alive, in that 120 years, there was never a keshes in the sky, because if you see a rainbow, it's a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have destroyed the world. But as HaKeshes Nasati Be'onan, he promised that when the rainbow's there, I will remind you of my promise and I won't destroy the world. And never in the lifetime of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai did anyone see a rainbow in the sky, because there was never a moment when he was alive that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would ever have destroyed the world. And that's why the word keshes, and that's why you see in the parks, and it's brought from Kadmonim from 1800 years ago, that the children go out and they shoot their bow and arrow, because a bow is like a rainbow. It's the shape of. And tzaddikim used to take a bow and arrow and go out wherever they went, to their backyard or to a park or to wherever they went, and they shot it, and as they thought, as they were shooting the bow, the arrow from the bow, they were thinking of the word keshes, which is spelled kuf, shin, tov, which stands for Tishma Kol Tefillah Seinu or Shava Seinu. Keshes. Or another thing is Shema Kol Tefillah Seinu. The first letters are the first letters of those three words, each of those three words, which when they were shooting that arrow through the bow and they held the bow, they were thinking of the word keshes of Tishma Kol Shav Osenu, with their big kavanas, because the day is so mesugal for the heights and the greatness of Reb Shimon, who was making the whole world. There was never a rainbow up in the sky, because it couldn't have been that Hashem would ever, with him alive, would have destroyed the world. So how much more is his koyach in Shamayim to protect, now that he was divested of his actual body, how much more koyach to protect Klal Yisrael is there? And that's a reason for us to rejoice, because there was nothing that when we think of someone that was nifter, did they go to Gehenna for a while? Was there something they had to pay a price for? All that side of the sadness of a person being nifter is out the window when you're talking about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. It was pure goodness for Klal Yisrael, and pure goodness to be able to sift down on the day and to be able to have the power of his presence. And by the way, many tzaddikim said that when they will be nifter, that if you go to their kever on Lag BaOmer, you should know that that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is there with them in the kever, that his ruchnius now saturated the makom, and that you can daven as if you're standing with the Rashbi in Meron on Lag BaOmer. Now, The end of the parsha has a parsha of, there was a man, and he went outside. The pasuk says, Vayetze Ish Yisrael. And the Medrash asks, he went out. Where did he go out from? Why is the pasuk saying Vayetze? He went out, and he cursed the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara calls it Mevarech es Hashem, because it's a lot nicer to say that he blessed the name of Hashem, rather than saying he cursed, but what he actually did was cursed. And Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't sure what the punishment had to be, and Hashem told him there's a death penalty for what he did. And the Medrash answers, where did he go out from? When you look at the end of the Sedra, Parshas Emor, this Sedra, you will see that the tail end of this, before this last Parsha, the second to the last Parsha, talks about the Lechem Aponim, that you know that there was the Shulchan inside the Kodesh, together with the menorah and the Mizbeach HaKetores. And on the Shulchan, they put 12 breads, each one corresponding to another Shevet. And it stayed there. They put on Erev Shabbos the bread, and it stayed there for 7 days. And then it was taken off by the Kohanim and eaten. And this was like a korban to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't shechted or anything, it was bread. It was challah. So this man went out and he said, he cursed Hashem's name. What a crazy mitzvah. You're going to take bread and put it on for 7 days? Stale, rotten bread? What a crazy thing. And he cursed Hashem's name for that reason. Look in the Medrash. So it reminds me, obviously this man was an extremist, a kitzoni, and there was once a story I heard from a friend that a box of svarim, of books, not svarim, arrived in Ner Yisrael, and there was a bacher that opened up the box, and he saw it was history books from Gretz, who was an apikoros, but he was a yid, and he wrote history books. And it was full with minos, apikoros, kfira, everything. So this bacher took the box, and he burnt every book. And they told Rav Ruderman. And Rav Ruderman said, this bacher has to leave the yeshiva, and you will see in due time that he's going to become a Reform rabbi. And the Talmidim were surprised. They asked the Rosh Yeshiva, he's a hothead, he's an extremist. You see, he took the books and he burnt them without asking anyone, without saying anything. He just ran and burnt them. So Rav Ruderman said, yes, exactly. Because when a person is an extremist, he goes off the deep end sooner or later. And indeed, in Los Angeles, that bacher became a Reform rabbi of a very big temple. What do we learn from this story? A person, first of all, has to wait to see what the end results are. Had this person waited to the end of the week, he would have seen that those breads came out tasty, warm. It was a miracle that they were there for a week, but they were excellent. and that they were as good as if they had just been baked. So we sometimes jump to conclusions. Many times when we think something is, we make judgments of what it is or it isn't, and then we put ourselves into a very uncomfortable position because we judged before we knew what the end results would be. So we learn not to jump to conclusions. But as far as being extremists, sometimes we get a moment of warmth. Oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. As all tzaddikim and Rosh Yeshiva said, keep the Taryag mitzvahs, be normal, do it with the amount and the flavor prescribed by Chazal. Don't become an extremist different from everyone else.